Welcome everyone to the first presentation of this year's C4 convention. We are delighted to have all of you, and we're going to be starting off the series with Dr. Roger Moore. Dr. Moore, you can now turn on your camera and unmute yourself if you would like. Use the green bar at the top. There is a small camera button and microphone button. And if you have any issues with that, please open the chat and send a message in there, and I will do my best to assist. So Dr. Moore has been a collector of many different types of colonial coins since he was just 5 years old. So he's been collecting for quite a while. And today we're going to be hearing about Virginia halfpence and how they came to be. Okay, it looks like we're having a little bit of trouble getting the camera and microphone going. So Dr. Moore, if you go up to the top of your screen, there's a little green bar. And if you hover over that, it kind of pops down. And then on the left-hand side, there is a microphone that says unmute, and then a little camera that says start video. And let's see, I'm going to send a little notification that will ask you to unmute yourself, so we should be able to hear you. There we go. Okay, we've got sound.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now hear you. I'm going to do the same thing to start your video. You should have a notification. There we go.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to hop off. I'll be back on to help out with Q&A when we are done.
Excellent. Thank you much. Welcome to all that have signed in to take a listen to the lecture today. I want to, before I start, basically say that Leanna Spearer, who is the person who was just talking, is the IT specialist and is trying to get some of us IT ignorant people up to date for her efforts in doing that. And Jim Glickman, as the chairman of the education committee, of actually bringing this all together for the very first virtual meeting of C4. Hopefully this is not going to continue on into the future years. Hopefully we'll be able to meet in person, but if not. And I also apologize for pulling you away from your Hallmark movies today. And I will tell you that my talk will not end in a kiss. In any case, my talk today is centered on the Virginia colonial coinage, and it's divided into two basic parts. Most of us as colonial coin collectors love the coins that we collect, but we also love the history about the coins that we collect. And so the first part of my talk is going to be dealing with the history, the 160 years that led up to the actual Virginia halfpence being minted. And then the second part is going to be dealing with the bugaboo that most people have in trying to collect these coins by variety. And that is trying to do an attribution, which is really one of the most difficult attributions to do of any of the coinages that we deal with. Before I actually, all right, I am, see if, okay. Before I actually get involved in the talk itself, I'd like to have a remembrance for the Virginia guys. These are three people who were important in my life in regard to learning about Virginia halfpence and communicating about them and researching them, writing papers about them, doing exhibits. Jim Spillman and Eric Newman were, I will have to tell you, one of the two key and most important people in my career in getting me involved in the Virginia halfpence, simply because Jim Spillman had me become a moderator of a Virginia halfpence e-sig way back when, and Eric Newman was a part of that, as well as Alan Anthony, which we'll talk about in a second, and a number of other people. And these people were ones that had done previous research, were interested in the coinage, were one of the few people that really were, and were major mentors to me. And so therefore, I need to give a shout out to them. The other person is Alan Anthony, which many of you know. He is a person that I would talk to on the phone for long hours, deciding whether a variety was a new variety or not. And in doing so, was able to learn a lot about Virginia halfpence because he started out collecting them far before I did. I promised Kathy, Alan Anthony's wife, when I spoke with her, that I raise a glass in his memory. But before I do that, I'd like to just tell you a little anecdote. I was on the phone with him 3 days before he died. He was in the hospital. He knew he had terminal illness. And his request to Kathy was to make sure that she paid his C4 dues. And that gives you an idea of the importance of C4 to him and the importance of the various friendships that he had made in C4. This is us here at the last C4 meeting when we were actually able to get together in person, and he and I were able to put together the only time all the known varieties of Virginia halfpence put together in one spot for people to inspect and look at. So without further ado, whatever you have that you may want to raise a glass to, here's my glass. I'd like to go ahead and give a toast to Alan for all his efforts in C4 and for being a friend and a colleague. So moving on to the talk, the road to the Virginia halfpence was definitely tortuous and difficult. And I will tell you that it started way back, way in the very beginning of the Virginia colony. Now, as most of you know, King James I had a charter that he developed, and he gave that charter to a newly formed company of individuals that got together and wanted to start a Virginia company that would settle Virginia and make millions of dollars. And so therefore, King James I was all for making millions of dollars. He had dollar signs in his eyes when he signed this charter that allowed the minting of coins. And you'd say to yourself, well, why would King James I, why would he ever think of giving permission to colonists in some far off distance colony to mint their own coinage? Well, the idea that he had and the guinea signs that he had in his eyes was associated with the fact that he thought the Virginia colony was going to be similar to the Spanish colonies. They would find mountains of gold and silver and be able to make huge amounts of money for his treasury. And another stipulation in that charter was he specified that he would receive 1/5 part of all the gold that was found, which was, his expectations were great, and all 1/4 part of all the silver, as well as 1/15 part of the copper. So it's not unusual. You'd think the Spanish, when they found their mountains of gold in the Central and South America, they minted their own coinage. And the idea was pretty much we were going to do the same thing. Britain was going to do the same thing with the mountains of gold that they found in Virginia. So, and that's how a lot of the colonists were attracted to join, become adventurers and take an adventure over to Virginia. It sounded like lots of fun. Well, they did land in Virginia, and they landed in an area called Powhatan, which is the territory that the Powhatan Indian tribe lived in, and their chief's name was Powhatan. And so they basically landed in a territory on what would be called the James River, and they developed a town called the Jamestown. Of course, King James I obviously figured prominently in all the decisions on the name calling. And in that group of colonists, there were 105 colonists, but these were guys that were out looking to make a lot of money. And they didn't really have a whole lot of skills, especially to settle a new wild territory and to hunt. Now, they did find excellent farmland, but the trouble was it was the beginning of a drought. And we know that there was a drought that just started at that time by looking at tree rings that were taken from that period. And the tea rings for about a 4 or 5 year period were extremely thin. So there was very little water falling and there was a major drought. The result of that drought was that they went out, in order to survive, they needed to trade with Indians. And while they were doing that, they were out looking for these precious metals, which they thought they would be able to find. And when they didn't find the precious metals, word got back to King James I, and 2 years after they'd landed and tried to make a settlement there and tried to find the precious metals, King James was disgusted, and his support for the colony kind of decreased significantly, and he came out with a second charter. that removed the ability to make coinage, but also made a lot of other restrictions, stipulations. So for this colony, this developing colony of people who really were innocent in regard to their knowledge and abilities in developing a new colony, survival depended upon them being able to trade with the Native Americans for food. But remember, this is a time of starvation. The Indians were starving too. And so therefore the Indians were not really happy with trading too much unless they were able to get things that they really wanted. And the things that they seemed to want were copper scraps, beads, and knives, axes, and of course firearms, which the Virginians did not want to give to the Indians because the Indians were not always acting in a pleasant, peaceful manner. In addition, there were a whole bunch of tokens and coins found. Now, amongst those tokens, well, first of all, let's talk about the copper scraps. There's been an excavation effort at Jamestown that they have been finding all sorts of things, and they were able to specify that those things were found within a certain period of the Virginia colony, and that was from 1607 to 1624. And in that area, they found over 17,000 pieces of scrap copper. Now, this scrap copper traded to the Indians could have been used for a whole variety of things, decorations being one, but also such things as making knives and other similar objects. The other thing that was found were a large number of beads. Hundreds of these, what were called nuva, these beads have been excavated at the Jamestown fort. Now these beads come in two types, and I'll try to point them out to you. If you notice, there's this one smaller blue bead, dark blue bead, and there's these larger, long blue beads. And this set of beads is a group that I bought that was excavated just outside of the Jamestown fort. So these were being spread out to the Native Americans in trade for food during the period of time that the settlers were trying to get settled. And these were probably manufactured either in Portugal or Venice, and probably, though we don't have absolute documentation of it, probably became part of each colonist trade kit that they were given by the Virginia Company when they came to America. The other things that is interesting that's being found there are a variety of coins. Now, most of the coins that are being found are coins that there may be one or two examples of them were found. And these coins are all ones that were in circulation at the time in England. So they probably came over with the settlers in their pocket and were lost at the Jamestown fort during its construction. And those are the ones that are the most numerous that have been found there. But in addition, there's another large group of coins and tokens that were found in larger numbers, significant numbers. There was this lead token here, this lead token of Queen Elizabeth I, dating back to probably being made around 1574. There was this Queen Elizabeth Irish penny and halfpenny. 123 of them were found. And these were pennies that were made in England by Queen Elizabeth to send up the Irish. They were underweight. The Irish hated them. And so they were sitting around in the Tower Mint. Nobody wanted them, and obviously could have been picked up at a pretty good price. There are other coins, and it's not the purpose of this talk to go through them. I think that could be a good talk in the future. But I'll just point out one other one, and that's the Nuremberg jettons. There were over 500 of these found. So why were these used to trade with the Indians? Probably not. These were probably used as counters in the various supply houses. The settlers had communal supply houses. They didn't have individual properties. And they basically would go to the supply house, and these counters were probably used as a way of keeping track of who had what and how much of it that they had. So within the first few years, you can understand how dire and terrible it was having to live in for this colonist who had lived there. If you notice that 3/4 of the people died, 3/4 of the people died in the first few years. possibly due to the lack of food, as well as being attacked sometimes by the Native Americans. And as I said before, the lack of the British Crown's interest in the colony was a significant factor in them the King James not wanting to support the colony until 1611, when Master John Rolfe, and if you remember, he's the one that ended up marrying Pocahontas. Well, he was also touring the Caribbean with the idea of eventually landing in Virginia to settle. And in Trinidad, he picked up some tobacco seeds and he brought them to the Virginia colony in 1611. By that time, the drought had passed. The land was wonderful for growing, and he grew some tobacco. Now, what's going on back in England? Well, believe it or not, the English did not always smoke, but tobacco from other places were beginning to infiltrate, and increasing numbers of people were smoking. And King James was writing all sorts of acts trying to dissuade people from smoking because he knew it was bad for your health and he knew it was bad for you. But the tobacco that Virginia sent back was rated as excellent, and it became the Virginia Gold. And suddenly King James's proclamations and warrants that went out all seemed to change also. If you read the various law books, they changed to being one of regulating and taxing and being able to control the people that were receiving it, making sure that he got taxes on every ounce that came in. In 1619, because of the lack of money and things of that sort, and the fact that there was some fluctuation in the value of tobacco, in 1619, an act was passed by the Virginia House of Burgesses that valued gold at 3 shillings a pound. And therefore, tobacco, because of the lack of currency, became a commodity currency. People's accounts were kept at tobacco banks, and that's how people were able to transact and produce some kind of commerce and keep track of what they did. But the point is that they didn't have little currency. They didn't have little valued things. And for the worker in the fields and for the manual laborers and for the poor, having small pieces of copper instead of trying to keep track of tobacco that they might or might not own became a real problem. So they requested King Charles I for 20,000 pounds of sterling copper. And instead, King Charles I came back with this offer of giving them privately made rose farthings under patent with Lord Malverdes. Now, these patent farthings were tiny. They're 9 grains. They're 20 times less in intrinsic value than in their copper value. They're also, if you notice, there's a little wedge here. Well, this wedge was part of the bimetallic makeup. This was one of the first bimetallic coins where they were using this as an anti-counterfeiting device, though it didn't seem to work because a lot of these were counterfeited. And they were used sparingly in the colony with some resistance just because there was a lack of any other coinage. But the point is that they really weren't liked. They were really awful. Nobody in England wanted them, and so that's why they were being sent over to the Virginia colony. So the House of Burgess did something incredibly awful. They actually told King Charles I that they didn't want these coins, and instead requested a silver coinage, hoping they would get a better type of coinage to be able to use. Now, the governor of Virginia, who was regally appointed, as well as King Charles himself, was furious at them. I mean, this was an affront to his rule and his supremacy as a godlike figure. But luckily, we don't know what would have happened if King Charles had continued on. But there was I don't know if luckily is the right word, but in any case, a rebellion was occurring against his Catholic rule in England at the time. And if you all remember or don't know, he was eventually dethroned and beheaded. So that could have ended that problem. But the problem still exists. They didn't have any coinage. So throughout the 1600s, multiple acts, which I'm not going to go through them all, were made to the crown. asking for coinage for the colony. And in each case, they were turned down. In 1700, the first time the House of Burgess then requested Queen Anne for English copper coins to be sent to Virginia. In 1710, again denied. 1727, George II asked for copper coinage, denied. So here we are, year after year, decade after decade, not getting any coinage. But in the early 1700s, due to a problem that was occurring in Spain, Philip V in Spain had planned to develop these a little bit lower level silver coins. They had 20% less silver than the normal regal coinage, but he meant them to be used by his own people. But he had a rebellion in his own kingdom. And in order to be able to support his troops, he had to take these coins that were meant for his own people and send them off elsewhere in regard to getting supplies and needed things for his war effort, which he eventually won. But the point is that these coins started coming into Virginia, and they were very welcome. And of course, what I'm talking about is the cross Pistareens. Now, the cross Pistareens, most of them, Mr. Case has done a wonderful article in Colonial Newsletter on these coins. But basically, they were made of debased silver. They're about the size of a 2 real, but in actuality, 5 Pistareens rather than 4 2 reals were equal to an 8 real coin. In spite of the fact of the smaller amount of silver in them, they were really highly welcomed in Virginia. They were considered a huge godsend simply because they'd been needing coinage for so much that even these coins that had a 20% reduction in their silver level were widely welcomed. In addition, in 1755, General Edward Braddock, who was working for the British colony and trying to stave off the French Indian War effort that was being waged against them, he got a huge influx of these coins in order to pay his troops. And so therefore there was a large number of these coins that came in. And in Virginia, the metal detectorists find these all the time. Now, the ratio of them finding is that most of these, because of this cross here, were easily cut into quarters. So most of these are found cut into quarters. A slightly smaller percentage were cut in half, and very few are actually found whole. And the ones that are found whole probably were ones that were lost early in the war effort. So where do we go from here? Denial, denial, denial. All the kings and queens up until King George III had denied any kind of coinage to be made for the colony of Virginia until November 10th, 1769. Once again, the Virginia House of Burgesses, not deterred by all the denials that they'd had, again asked the Crown for allowance of minting up to 25 pounds sterling worth of copper coins for their colony. Now, this was a huge amount, by the way. This is 125 tons of copper coinage. And we'll see that that has changed as time goes on. In any case, in February 11th, 1771, the British Secretary of State for the Virginia College, who was located in England, Lord Hillsborough, actually gave permission and was given permission by King George III to move forward. First time, hooray. So there were much back and forth letters. Remember, the back and forth letters each took 2 to 3 months to get across the Atlantic. And finally, some things were getting established. Now, one thing that really helped this effort toward getting a coinage for Virginia was that there was a gentleman called John Norton. And John Norton had settled in Virginia. He became a prominent citizen in Virginia and started a major mercantile business that had its own ships. And he had a son. And that son took over the business in Virginia while he went back to London to run the things on the London side. And he was very good friends with Robert Nicholas, who you may or may not know was the treasurer of Virginia. And turns out that Robert Nicholas's daughter and John Norton's son ended up getting married. So that kind of improved the lubrication between their relationships. In any case, the Virginia colony, because of John Norton's close ties, arranged to have John be the major go-between in England in getting these coins actually made. And there's a wonderful book for those of you that want a glimpse of what life was in colonial Virginia. There's a set of letters, John Norton's and Sons letters, that went back and forth for the whole period of time, 1750 to 1795, which give you a real eye-opening idea of what life was like. So I suggest this just for interest's sake, not necessarily, I mean, there's a lot about the Virginia coinage in this, but there's also a lot about colonial life. And I'll just give you one tidbit out of it. In a letter that he was writing to William Nelson, that was back in August 14th, 1967, John Norton received a letter from Nelson that, went through a whole bunch of things, but one little snippet of it said, "We have lost a dear old friend, Colonel Berkeley, too, from a very odd cause. He'd swallowed a large fish bone, no one knows how long before, which was extracted through the natural passage with much difficulty and wounded the parts internally, so much so to produce mortification." Now, if that's not a horrific way to die, I'm not sure how many others that there are equally as bad. But the point is that you can imagine these people in this colony having no physicians, having very little medication. Basically, that time in their history, there was no antibiotics, and having something as stupid as having swallowed a fish bone, a big one, evidently, but having swallowed a fish bone and dying from that, really, life was precarious in those days. So let's get back to the Virginia coinage. So by mid-1771, it was finalized by the Virginia colony that they really only wanted 100 pounds sterling, which was valued at 60 halfpence per pound, or 5 tons worth. So obviously they came down from their initial request for 25,000 pounds sterling. By 1772, a proposed design was made by Virginia and sent to the Crown, and except for the removal of the word peace from the proposed legend, the Crown King George III accepted it. He didn't want peace in there. I don't know why. Maybe because he knew that there was so much rebellion going on and so much anti-England sentiment. So he didn't want peace in there in case he actually had to actively intervene. And by March 1773, the Tower Mint also approved the application for the minting of these coins. May 20th, 1773, the Crown authorized the minting, again, as much as 25,000, only 1,000 were done. And by July 15th, John Norton had obtained the copper. Now, we actually have the records of John Norton and the copper delivered at the mint. And they were delivered at the mint 3 different times in different amounts. And a total of 8 tons of copper were brought to the Tower Mint in sheets. And these sheets, from those sheets, planchets were made, 5 tons of planchets. And there was 3 tons of sisal left over that they sent back to the copper company and got their money back for that. So the thing is that there's so much great documentation that's available that you don't find in much of the other coinages that have been made. By July 31st, 1773, the minting tools were made by the engravers. And by September 25th, 1773, 5 tons of Virginia halfpence had been made. And Eric Newman has estimated that that was equivalent to 627,000 coins. All right, so I'm going to digress just for a second. I would say that in my researches of the Virginia coinage, perhaps one of my highlights was being able to take a trip over to Cardiff, Wales, to the Royal Mint Museum. This gentleman on the right is Graham Dyer. He is in his 80s, but he is a specialist in a whole variety of coinages, but Virginia was one of his interests. There's a more disreputable looking me. And of course, our discussions of the Virginia coinage was overseen the whole time by Paddington Bear. But what I was able to do is I was able to spend 4 hours photographing, measuring, and evaluating the 4 Royal Mint Museum Virginia tools that were used in making the Virginia coinage. And if you notice there, over onto your left, there is the large one, which is a matrix. There were 2 obverse matrices made and 2 reverse matrices made. And from each of them, 2 punches were made. Actually, I'll change that statement. A total of 2 punches were made with the 2 matrices. And we have obverse punches and reverse punches. And of course, the punches were used to make the dies. Now, there were 40 obverse dies made and 30 reverse dies, but they were all destroyed after the mintage was done, except for this one lone one, which escaped being destroyed, probably because they wanted at least one example to be there. So yeah, I think it's important for us, in order to understand the difficulty associated with attributing Virginia halfpence, to take a look at what these punches that were used to make all the dies actually look like. And this is an obverse punch. It's typical. You'll see that there's a little center dot right there that's right in the punch itself. And then the whole visage of King George III is, is totally perfect. It's intact, it's full, it's complete. So we have this complete elevated central device. We have these rough fields, but when these were punched into the die, the fields were the upper part, the elevated part, and they were simply lapped clean. And then a legend was put in. So the reason we have trouble evaluating and deciding one Virginia halfpence variety from another is that the only differences between them have to do with the placement of the legend around the outer edge. This is obviously far different from most of the state coinages that we love also. The reverse, we take a look at the reverse punch. We see again, the whole central device is the elevated field, and the rough outer edges in the fields. We see the rough outer edges, and again, that was lapped off when it was put into a die. But there's some other things here that you ought to notice. One is that in this area here, there are supposed to be 3 lions, one on top of each other. They're not there. In this area, there's supposed to be 2 lions, one on top of each other. They're not there. Around this lion, there are 5 little hearts that are placed. They're not there. And the harp strings are missing from the harp, as well as the legend. So there are a lot of different things that had to be put in by the engravers into the dies to in order to be able to actually make a determination of one die being different from another. And basically, there's a lot more little things that were added by the die maker to the reverses than the obverses. And so therefore, typically, the reverse dies are easier to attribute than the obverse. Back to the Virginia coinage, troop over to Virginia. By February 24th, we know from the Virginia Gazette that the halfpence arrived in the good ship called Virginia. This was a ship owned by John Norton. It was known as a top-heavy ship. So I have to tell you that the Virginia coinage in their cast had the indignity of being used primarily as a ballast for the boat in order to be able to make it bottom heavy and stay afloat. And then a screw up occurred. People changed, the Virginia secretary over in England changed, and therefore some people got cold feet about going ahead and releasing the Virginia coinage at that time. And it took over a year for get this sorted out. So these Virginia coins were transported to Williamsburg, and they sat in Williamsburg for over a year while this was finally being decided. And until February 27th, 1775, finally, these coins that have been requested for 166 years finally were available to the public. And this is the notice that actually occurred in the Virginia Gazette. And basically, halfpence could be exchanged for gold, silver, and treasury notes. Now, Virginians were pretty savvy. And I severely think that the exchange, nobody is going to exchange gold and silver for copper coins, even though they were beautiful coins. But treasury notes, the paper notes had very little value and seemed to be losing value as more and more of them were being produced. And so my own bet is that large numbers of these treasury notes were cashed in exchange for the halfpence. The exchange occurred in Robert Nicholson's office in Williamsburg. Remember, he's the treasurer. And unfortunately, 50 days later, we had Lexington Concord occur, and probably everybody at that point hoarded the coins. But I think there was that 50-day period that there was definite circulation of these coins, and large numbers of them have been found that were probably lost both before the war as well as after the war along the whole eastern coast. All right, so now I'm going to change gears a little bit and say that there are 31 varieties, and most people that have to deal with these coinages have the same comment, but they all look the same. So everybody has decided that they're not going to go ahead and try to get the coins by variety, and instead they're going to try to get them, just get a type of each of them, each of the major types. All right, well, I'd like to spend the rest of the talk and give you a little time to ask questions on what are the differences and how does one go about attributing these coins. If you take a look at the obverse, there are 23 obverses. There are, of the 40 dies that were used, 23 of them we know 23 obverse varieties exist. 23 die varieties exist for the obverse. And these can be divided into two groups. There are those that have a point that follows the S in Georgievus, and those that lack a point. So right off the bat, you can start dividing these down into two groups. Obverses that do not have a point, there are 14, but really 13, because one of those 14 is the Virginia penny. And there are 9 varieties that have the point. So right off, you can actually decrease the numbers that of coins that you have to try to decide which one is which, just on the basis of whether a point occurs on the obverse or not. The other thing that can be looked at is the reverse. And if one takes a look at the reverse, we see there are some with 6 harp strings. There are 2 different varieties that have that. There are some with 7 harp strings. There are 14 varieties of that. And there are some with 8 harp strings. And there are 6 varieties with that. So by basically having these major features that can automatically put coins into one group or another, you can narrow it down even further. You have a coin that has a point and 7 harp strings. Well, that narrows the various varieties down from that 31 down to a lower level. Now, the other thing that I'd like to bring out, other than that gross, obvious ability to break these coins down into into smaller groups so that you can make a decision on what they are, is that there's a guy, William Vetch, and he is a coin guy who lives in Virginia. He is elderly, and back in the 1980s, I believe, he had a newsletter called the Generation Newsletter on Virginia coinage. And one thing he told me, he and I became good friends and discussed, we still discuss coins periodically online. But main thing about his approach is that he told me early on that when attributing a Virginia halfpence, pay attention to the little things. Now, I was a New Jersey guy. You don't have little things. You take a look at the great big horse head and whether it's got, you know, it's left or right, or it's got a, you know, a bridle, or whether it's got a date under plow, you know, all these things that are gross major things that are easy to distinguish between one another. So I really didn't take his advice to heart until I really started studying these things. And what I found is that there are large numbers of these different obverses and reverses that have little things on them that will help you immediately to make an identification. Now, these are things that unfortunately you have to memorize. If you get involved in collecting these coins by variety, they are things that to make it easier for you, you just have to learn. The good thing about it is a lot of them are some of the more common coins that you're going to come across, common varieties, and therefore it's going to help you. So let's say obverse 4. What is it that we find? Well, we found there are these die break that occurs on every single 4 obverse that I've ever found. So if you see this breakdown here, this die, this big die blip that probably occurred in the die, if not early on, right at the beginning when it was first formed, which I think happened. Maybe it progressed as time went on, because sometimes this is bigger than in others, but it's always there. And this immediately identifies it as obverse 4. And obverse 4 is only paired with 4 reverses, G, O, P, and T. And so therefore, all you have to do in order to determine what that variety is identify the reverse as to which of those 4 types it possibly is. The 8 obverse has a broken E in the REX, Georgievus Rex. So if you see that, you know you got an 8 obverse, and the 8 obverse is only paired with the H reverse. So right off the bat, you have an identification. And I'll tell you, it's nice to know that, because 8 H's are extremely hard to find in high grade. You can find a lot of them in low and medium grades, but trying to find one in high grade. So if you can identify this right off the bat as an H8 in somebody's bourse, somebody who has coins out in their case, that's one that you might want to grab if it's in high grade. One of the more common coins is the 24 obverse, and it's got a little blip also that is on every one of them right under the chin. And you're going to come across these a lot because these are one of the more frequently found. And their only reverse that the 24 obverse comes with is the 24K. So right off the bat, again, you're going to be able to make a determination of exactly which of the coins it might be. I'll tell you that it's neat to know these little things. There's a whole page of these things in the Virginia book, and it's under a very quick attribution guide. So it allows you to make these determinations very quickly. Reverse is the same thing. There's a whole bunch of different reverse identifications. There's the U reverse has this broken area under the right arm of the letter A in the legend. And this U reverse is only paired with a relatively newly found obverse called the 16 obverse. And these are usually very high grade, but this is also a higher rarity. And so therefore, this is one to be able to identify. As opposed to the next 2 that I'm going to talk about, which are probably the most common coins you're going to come across, most common varieties. This is the M reverse, and it's got this blip that occurs in the vertical portion of the shield, and it only occurs in the 25 Ms. On the J reverse, you have this double right-footed A, and that only occurs with the 27 obverse. So by learning these little things, you can actually make a quick identification. And so therefore, at this point, I'd like to take a pause to have a blatant commercial break, to say that all of these various small things that you ought to be looking for, and that will give you a rapid identification, are in a book. It's a C4 book. C4 needs to get its profits back on this book. So if you don't have it, it's actually a good read and has a lot of the history. The first whole section of the book is on the history, and then there's a whole chapter on some other things like the forgeries and things of that sort. So obviously I'm biased. I like the book, but on the other hand, I think it actually would be a positive for your library. Having said that, there will be coins that you get that aren't very high grade. And these are the ones that are the hardest to attribute, because sometimes those little things aren't there. Or there are some of the varieties that just don't have little things, in which case you need to get a more in-depth evaluation, have some kind of an attribution guide that will take you through how to go ahead and do the attribution. And I'm going to take you through one possible attribution guide that you might use, just one branch of that goes down to a twig. But the point is that there are a variety of things that you can use to make a determination of and distinguishing one variety from another. So let's take a without point obverse. And if you take a look here, we have 13 different ones. There are 14 obverses without a point. I left the number 1 off because it's the Virginia penny. It doesn't have a point. But these are the 13. So you have to figure out a way you can separate that into a more manageable group. And one way of doing it is looking at the distance of the letter S in Georgivis from the laurel leaf. And you can see that there are those that are, there are some that are more distant than others. They're more distant. Now, distant is a relative term. Distant or close is a relative term. And so therefore, it's important to be able to actually have something that you can compare that. But by doing this, by dividing them into more distant and closer, you can actually divide them into 2 relatively equal groups. And the way to help you in making that determination is having a guide that you can go to and take a look at all of the no point obverses and see the distance that occurs between those that are distant and those that are close. The next step in this is you take the group, and I'm only going to do the distant group. There is the close group over here, and that has another whole branch, but where I'm going to do the distance group, I look at the tip of the nose to the R in Rex. And you notice that here we now divide these 5 different varieties into 2 and 1, where the R where the R is to the left of REX, and there those that are that actually have it on the right or even on the REX. So now we go to the next step of the tree, and we notice that we take a look at the 2 that are in that branch that are left, and we see that there are some that have the point closer to the R and some with the point more distant from the R. And so we're able to break it down into a 10 obverse and a 2 obverse. Similarly, we can do the same thing with the reverses. And again, I'm not going to go through the whole process here because it's just too long and time is wasting. And so therefore, we take a look at the number of harp strings. We have the 2 that are in the 6 harp string group, and then there are 14 in the 7, and we said there were 6 in the 8 string. So basically with the 6, and I'll just do it as a simple one, you draw a line along that first harp string and see where it intersects in the legend. And you'll see that the A reverse intersects on the A, the B reverse accepts way above. So now you've made the determination. So once you have done that determination and pretty much are happy with your attribution of one side, you can look to see if it's only paired with the other, with the one that is supposed to be paired with on the other side, or the one or couple. And my suggestion is that if you think that you still have made an attribution based upon the fact that that reverse only has one obverse paired with it, that you still go ahead and take a look at the other side, because there are new varieties to be discovered out there. And my favorite quote of my own is, "There may be many undiscovered Virginia varieties in old unattributed collections, since only 31 of 1,200 possible die combinations are known. With 40 obverse dies and 30 reverse dies known to have been made, there's a 1,200 possible combinations of those dies that could occur. And we only know 31. But if you have my book and you've read it, you'll notice that there is, in a statement in the book, there's only 30 known die varieties. So why am I saying that there are 31 die varieties? Well, this last September, or a month and a half ago, on eBay, and you're the first to hear it, except for the publication I sent in to Will to come out in the next newsletter. There is a new variety that I discovered, and basically it's one that's, if you take a look down here, it's got that little area underneath, which tells me that it's an obverse number 4. And then because that was at that time paired with only 3 other reverses, I went to see which one it was, and it didn't fit any of them. And it turns out it's paired with a relatively rare T reverse that was discovered just a couple of decades ago, the 13T, and the T is not known to be paired with any other obverse. So there are varieties to be found out there. I think that once people actually start sitting down and attributing these things, I now have a unique coin, which is hopefully, hopefully will stay unique, but that's the positive side of it. The negative side is my book that just came out last year is now obsolete because it's missing that the one variety that I discovered. So the Virginia Halfpence rarities, there are 4 of them that you are going to have a lot of trouble finding. Though, as I said, as these collections start opening up, we may find out that there are enough of them that there are available to collectors. But the extremely rare ones, there are 4 of them. The 4T that I just said is the only one I know of so far, but I'm sure there are going to be others that are found. When they first found the 13T and the 13V, they were the only ones known, and suddenly a lot of them started appearing. There are a number of rarities, relatively rare ones, as well as a large number of common and a larger number of very common. The common ones may be hard to get in high grade, not always, but you can find some high grade ones, but you may have to battle another person for them. But for the most part, most of these are collectible. The only ones I would say that at this time are uncollectible are the 4 that are in the upper part right here. So on this, I'm going to end my talk. I want to thank you all for having paid attention to it. I do think that there are lots of other varieties out there to be found. If you do come across one, I would love for you to go ahead and send me, this is my email address up here, rogermoore435@yahoo.com. Please let me know. If nothing else, I can indicate whether or not it is truly a new variety by looking at your images, and hopefully get it written up and published so that others can be out looking for the same thing. And I am open for any questions for the last 5 minutes, unless people would like to take a little break and go to the bathroom.
We do have about a 15-minute break between presentations, so we'll have a little time for that. So if you want to go ahead and stop your screen share, there's a red button at the very top that says stop share.
Actually, it's at the bottom. It got moved. But okay.
That works. Okay, so audience members, we have a couple text questions in the Q&A. But if you would like to ask a question live, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little button that says raise hand. If you click on that, if you have a question, then I will enable your microphone so you can actually ask it and have a conversation with Dr. Moore. So I'm going to go ahead and take the first hand that went up, and then we'll do one from the Q&A and kind of bop back and forth. So, okay, I don't know who this is. Their name is some numbers, so we will find out. Okay, whoever you are. At the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you can now see a little microphone button that says mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Hey, Roger, it's Dennis Wuersma. That sort of came when I set up Zoom, but quick question for you. On the reverse matrix, there are a number of open areas, including the harp strings and a few others. Do you have any idea why they were there to begin with? Why you wouldn't just put a 7-string harp in there and 2 lions?
Well, that's been a topic for major controversy, believe it or not. I have no idea why they didn't put the lions in, but as far as the harp strings, that's been an area that's been discussed. William Vetch stated basically that these die sinkers were making dies between July and December and September, when they finished making the 5 tons of coins. William Vetch proposed that the reason for the different numbers of die strings, 6, 7, and 8, was that was attributed to the time, the month, that it was actually June through August that they were making them, and they minted them in September, that those were directly related to the month that they were being engraved. And so William Vetch thought that the 6 harp string ones were made in June, the 7 in July, and the 8 in August. This was presented, you know, we discussed this on that, in that ESIG group. Eric Newman and Jim Spillman thought that that was far-fetched and was not the reason that that was done. I sort of liked it because it kind of indicated that maybe this was the way of the engravers keeping track of when their dies were made. I liked the idea, and I put it in the book, but I also indicated the provisos that a key major numismatists like Spellman and Newman had stated that they thought that it was incorrect. But my own personal feeling is that I like the idea.
You know, Roger, I'm sure you're familiar with gun money, where they actually date the die by month. And this has a certain appeal to me too.
Yeah, I mean,
it makes some logical sense.
Exactly. In addition, there were thought to be maybe 2 engravers that had done the engraving of these coins. And the other idea is maybe these were different ways for the engraver. I mean, there are 3 different types, numbers of harp strings, but it could have been a way for different engravers to be able to put their own signature on the dies that they had done the engraving on. Again, you know, we don't have any documentation. And you know, I searched this. You know, when I was in Wales, I got some really good documentation and evidence and information about the Virginia coinage, which is there, you know, as opposed to a lot of the coinages that were made. And there's no mention of this in any of those documents. So I don't know. It may be some kind of internal mint records, but I did not have access to those.
Yeah, also too, I think it's common to have privy marks on some of the early English coinage. So it does fit into that theory, but obviously it's speculative. One other thing, Roger, are you wearing the same shirt from 25 years ago?
I am. I did that on purpose.
It still fits is the big thing.
I want a numismatist 1,000 years from now looking back and saying that poor Dr. Moore, he didn't have enough money to have a new shirt. He wore the same shirt every day, all year long for 25 years. So yeah, exactly. This is and I'm going to still do this. It's just, hopefully we can get together and be together at the next C4 instead of being in this situation that we're in now.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Dennis.
All right, thank you. Okay, and then I'm going to ask one of the questions from the text Q&A, and then hopefully we'll be able to squeeze in one more audio question. And let's see. Oh, there's the correct button. Okay, let's see. From Randy Clark, images of the matrix and hub dyes are fascinating. Are they available online for study? I would like to understand them more related to how Connecticut's hubs might have been made.
If you would like to have, well, buy my book. But Randy, I look forward to getting your book on Connecticut's. Even though I don't collect them, I just do have some. You probably had a great day yesterday. I could, if anybody wants pictures of those tools, I will be glad to send them to you. Just you got my email there at the bottom of the screen. Just send me an email reminding me what you want, and I will dig out those images and get them to you.
Okay, then let's see. The next hand that went up was Richard August. So Richard, I'm going to, oh, it will not allow me to promote you to talk because of your version of Zoom. That is unfortunate. Well, if you want to send your question in the text Q&A, we will get to it. I'm sorry, I didn't know that was a limitation of Zoom. So there we go. Okay, so we have Wayne Shelby. So Wayne, on the lower left-hand corner of your screen, there's a little microphone icon. If you click on that, it should unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Okay, I think I got it.
Yep.
Hey, Roger, this is Wayne.
Hey, Wayne. Did you go out metal detecting today?
No, the other day I did, though. No Virginias.
Well, keep.
The question I had was, I just kind of thought of it here while we're all sitting here thinking, is that what about the counterfeit pennies or half pennies were circulating back then, being lightweight, and the Virginia coppers being lightweight? Was one valued more than the other, or was one considered obsolete because it was illegal, and the other one, Virginia, was legal?
Well, remember, half pennies, all half pennies, most of the time until the copper panic of 1789, all copper pennies were valued at twice their face value in the colonies. So in other words, a half penny was worth a penny. Same with a farthing. A farthing was worth a half penny. And so I don't think that there was a differentiation made. The differentiation came when it came down to actually the artistic and beauty and the designs of the coins. And Ben Franklin indicated that the Virginia penny was a beautiful coin and would hopefully force the ugly counterfeit coins that have been circulating in their place, in the place of all copper coins that came over and were flooding the market in the colonies, that he was hoping that the Virginia coinage would as he put it, push the trash out of circulation. So I think that the basis of the coppers were not based upon face value. If a merchant got a half penny, whether it was counterfeit or no matter what it was, he would, unless it was obviously crude and poorly made or not made of copper, it was pewter or lead or something of that sort, they would usually accept it at that face value when they were accepting it. But there's a paper coming out in Jeans that I did on coins. Well, as you know, you're a co-author on it. There's a paper coming out on the counterfeit halfpence that were found in the I-95 dig that are made from lead and pewter and tin, and those are the coins that ended up causing a furor as huge numbers of coins that were either made from them or them themselves that were trying to be passed those were obviously crude and not worth anything. And that's what undermined and caused some of the major panics and riots that occurred in many of the cities. So, so yeah, I think that I think they were valued the same as the counterfeit halfpence until push came to shove and people start not accepting coppers at all.
Okay, well, we are out of time, so we're going to have to wrap it up there. If you have any other questions, I'm sure you'll be welcome to email Dr. Moore.
Yeah. Anybody, any questions? You need anything? Just give me a email, and I'll try to get back to you.
Okay, so this was the first of our Newman lectures for the convention. We have the second Newman lecture coming up next with Dr. David Menschel. So go ahead and tune into that one in just a couple minutes. We'll have it up and running. And thank you all for listening. Thank you, Dr. Moore. It was a very interesting presentation and very informative.
And
Have a good day.
start getting other people out there attributing their Virginians, because I know there are bodies to be found.
Mm-hmm.
Should I mute me?
Okay, I'm going to end the meeting so everyone will be kicked out. Go back to the C4 website to get the link for Dr. Menschel's talk up next. So it'll be open, Menschel, pardon me.
David Menschel. Yeah.
Pardon me. Well, it'll be open in just a few minutes, so stay tuned. Okay.